The boxes were already stacked by the door when my daughter-in-law said it. Not quietly, not with any hesitation. She stood in the middle of the kitchen I had paid for, in the house I had signed over 3 years earlier, and looked me straight in the eye. "This arrangement isn't working anymore, Beverly. We need our space." I didn't answer right away. I looked past her at the granite countertops I'd chosen. The window above the sink I'd insisted on because it faced east, and morning light matters when you're getting older. I'd paid for all of it. Every fixture, every cabinet, every inch of the hardwood floor beneath her feet. My son stood in the doorway to the living room. He didn't look at me. I said, "I see." And that was all. She must have expected more. A protest, maybe. Tears. The kind of scene she could later describe to her friends over brunch as the reason she'd had no choice. But I didn't give her that. I picked up my coffee mug from the counter and walked out to the back porch, and I sat down in the old rocking chair I'd brought from my previous house, the one my late husband Raymond had sanded smooth the summer before his diagnosis, and I watched the birds at the feeder I'd hung when I first moved in. It was April. The dogwoods were blooming along the back fence. I had moved into the in-law suite 18 months earlier. My own choice, truly. After Raymond passed, the house on Carlisle Street felt less like home and more like a museum. All the rooms, exactly as we'd left them. Nothing moved, nothing changed, as if someone was still expecting him back. My son had suggested it first, gently, over dinner one Sunday. "There's plenty of room, Mom. Elaine and I would love having you close." And I'd believed him. I sold the house on Carlisle Street. I used the equity, $214,000, to build the addition on their property. An in-law suite with its own entrance, its own bathroom, its own small kitchenette. My name was not on the deed. My son had asked me to keep it simple, said it would complicate things legally, said trust was better than paperwork between family. I had trusted him. For 18 months, I paid my share of utilities without being asked. I watched my granddaughter on school days so Elaine could work her half days. I brought groceries without keeping count. I watered the plants when they traveled. I existed as quietly as I knew how, careful not to crowd their life, careful to always knock before entering the main house, careful to be useful without becoming a burden. And now she was telling me the arrangement wasn't working. I stayed on the porch until I heard the back door open behind me. My son stepped out. He was still in his work clothes from the day before, tie loosened, collar open. He sat on the step rather than in the chair beside me, which told me everything about how this conversation was going to go. "Mom," he started. "Don't," I said. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." He was quiet for a long time. A robin landed on the feeder, looked around, left. "Elaine feels like she can't relax in her own home. She says there's always someone here. Always the sound of the TV or footsteps or, I see. It's not that she doesn't care about you. Pete it." I looked at him then, really looked. My son, 51 years old, gray beginning at his temples, Raymond's jaw, my father's eyes. I remembered the night he was born, the way Raymond had held him for the first time and cried without embarrassment. I remembered driving him to baseball practice at 6 in the morning because that was the only field time available. I remembered the year he was 26 and his first business failed, and he called me from a gas station parking lot at midnight, and I got in the car and drove 2 hours without a second thought. "I invested $214,000 in this property," I said. "My name isn't on the deed." He didn't answer. "I want you to think carefully before you answer my next question." I set my coffee mug down on the arm of the rocking chair. "Did you know she was going to say this to me today?" The pause was long enough. "I thought she might bring it up," he said. "I didn't know today specifically." I nodded once. I stood up slowly, the way you do when your knees are in their 60s too, and I went back inside and closed the door quietly behind me. That night I sat at the small desk in my suite and opened my laptop. I didn't cry. I wasn't ready to cry yet, and I knew if I started I would lose the clarity I needed. Instead, I opened a blank document and I began to write down every number I could remember. The addition cost. The appliances I'd replaced in the main kitchen because Elaine wanted stainless steel, and they'd had white. The new HVAC unit 2 summers ago because the old one struggled, and my son had mentioned it with that particular tone people use when they want you to offer. The property taxes I'd quietly paid for the better part of a year when my son lost his contract and wouldn't tell me directly, but left the bill on the kitchen counter where I'd see it. The number was $261,000, roughly, not including 18 months of groceries, childcare, and utilities. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet. Raymond used to say that you could tell the measure of a person not by how they treated you when things were easy, but by what they did when things got inconvenient. He said it about others. He never imagined I'd one day apply it to our own son. I picked up my phone and called my friend Dorothy, who was a retired real estate attorney and had been my closest friend for 31 years. She answered on the second ring, even though it was nearly 10 o'clock, because that's the kind of friend she was. I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. "Beverly?" she said carefully. "You built on their property?" I did. "And your name is not on the deed." "It is not." She exhaled slowly. "Okay. Don't say anything to them yet. Don't argue. Don't ask for anything. Come to my office Thursday morning and we'll look at what documentation you have. Receipts, wire transfers, any texts about the arrangement. I have all of it," I said. "I keep everything." "Good girl," she said. And then, "I'm sorry. I really am." I thanked her and set the phone down. I looked around the room. My photographs on the wall, Raymond's last birthday, my granddaughter Maisie at her kindergarten graduation, a print I'd bought in Savannah the summer before everything changed, my books on the shelf above the desk, the quilt my mother had made folded across the foot of the bed. None of it was going anywhere easily. Neither was I. The next 3 days I was careful. I did not raise the conversation again with my son. I was not cold, but I was not warm either. I was simply present, quiet, watching. Elaine moved through the house with the particular performance of someone who expected a fight and was irritated not to get one. She cooked dinner without offering me a plate, which was new. She answered my good mornings with something that technically counted as a response, but required generosity to qualify as one. My son watched all of this and said nothing, and that, more than any of it, was the thing that settled in my chest and stayed there. My granddaughter Maisie was 8. She didn't understand the shift in temperature, but she felt it the way children do, in her body before her mind. She came to my suite after school on Wednesday and sat on my bed and asked me if I was sad. "A little," I said. "Is it because of Mom and Dad?" I looked at her carefully. She had her father's eyes and my stubbornness, which I considered a gift, and her parents considered a complication. "It's grown-up stuff," I said. "Nothing for you to worry about." She leaned against my shoulder. "I don't want you to move away, Grandma." I put my arm around her. "I know, sweet girl." I held her there longer than I needed to, not out of sadness, but because she was the only honest thing in that house, and I wanted to sit in that honesty for a few more minutes before I had to go back to being strategic. Thursday morning, I met Dorothy at her office. She wore reading glasses now, which was new since I last saw her at church, and she spread my documents across her conference table with the quiet efficiency of someone who had seen everything. She was good at her job because she didn't pretend and she didn't reassure you just to make the conversation easier. "The verbal agreement and the paper trail both matter," she said. "The fact that you wire transferred the full construction cost to the contractor directly, not to your son, is significant. You have texts where he specifically says the suite is yours to live in as long as you want." That phrase, those exact words, he sent it to me when I asked about it, I said. "I remember thinking it was vague, but I didn't want to push. It's not iron, But it's something. She folded her hands. You have a few avenues. None of them are quick, and none of them will preserve the relationship as it currently stands. The relationship as it currently stands, I said, appears to have an expiration date regardless. She nodded once. Then let me tell you what your options are. I listened. I asked questions. I took notes in the small notebook I carried everywhere, the one with the blue cover and Raymond's initials on the inside front, because it had been his. And I'd started using it after he passed, because it made me feel less alone when I had to make decisions. When I left Dorothy's office 2 hours later, I sat in my car in the parking lot for a moment. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I wanted to be still before the next thing. There was a tree at the edge of the lot just beginning to leaf out. That particular pale green of early spring that Raymond always called honest green because it hadn't committed to anything yet. I thought about what Dorothy had said. I thought about the $261,000. I thought about my son standing in the doorway not looking at me. And then I started the car. I didn't go home. I went to the bank. I sat with my personal banker, a young woman named Priya, who had always been kind to me, and I made 2 decisions. The first was to open a new account in my granddaughter Maisie's name, a custodial account with me as the trustee, and to transfer $40,000 into it. The second was to begin the process of formally documenting a financial claim against the property, which Dorothy had said would require a letter from her office to my son's address. Priya handled it all with quiet efficiency and did not ask questions that weren't her business. When we finished, she said, "Is there anything else I can help you with today, Mrs. Harmon?" "No," I said. "I think that covers it." On the way home, I stopped at the nursery and bought a flat of marigolds. I planted them along the front walk of my suite that afternoon, not because I was sure I'd be there to see them bloom fully, but because doing something with my hands helped me think, and because giving up on the garden felt like giving up on something I wasn't willing to give up on. My son came home at 6. He found me on my knees in the dirt. "Mom." He stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, that expression men get when they know they owe you something and haven't decided yet how much to pay. "Can we talk tonight?" "Of course," I said. I pressed the last marigold into its hole. After dinner, he nodded and went inside. I washed my hands at the outdoor spigot, dried them on my garden towel, and stood there for a moment, looking at the small row of orange and yellow against the black soil. Ordinary, stubborn, alive. We sat at the kitchen table after Maisie was in bed. Elaine was upstairs, which was either polite or strategic, and I didn't spend energy deciding which. My son folded his hands on the table. He looked tired in a way that had less to do with work and more to do with the particular exhaustion of a man trying to be 2 different versions of himself. "Mom, I want to find something that works for everyone. Tell me what that looks like," I said. "Elaine and I have been talking about converting the suite into a rental, generating some income. We'd find you a place close by, a good apartment, maybe the Magnolia Court complex off Route 9. They have really nice." "Did you know," I said quietly, "that the addition you want to rent out costs $214,000? My money? My savings from selling my home?" He looked at his hands. "And that in 18 months I have also contributed to this household in ways that are harder to calculate, but that I have nonetheless calculated?" "Mom, I know, and that's why we'd help with your rent." "I don't need help with rent," I said. "I need you to hear what you are telling me." He looked up. "You are telling me that you will profit from the space I built with my inheritance, while I live alone in an apartment, and that this seems fair to you. That's not how." "I'm not angry with you," I said, and I meant it. I'd gone past anger somewhere between the nursery and the dinner table. What I was now was something cooler and clearer, but I need you to understand that I'm not going to simply agree to this. He was quiet for a long time. "What do you want then?" "I want you to understand what you're doing. That's the only thing I've ever really wanted from you." He didn't answer. Some answers don't come immediately, and I'd learned by now not to mistake the delay for a no. I went to bed early. I didn't sleep well, but I didn't expect to. The house was quiet, in the particular way houses are when everyone inside is awake and pretending otherwise. Dorothy's letter arrived at their address 4 days later. I knew because my son knocked on my suite door at 7:30 in the morning, holding the envelope, unopened, but clearly identified by Dorothy's firm name in the return corner, and his face had the expression of a man who has received news he cannot quite process. "What is this?" "Open it," I said. He did, standing in the doorway. I watched him read. His jaw tightened once, then again. When he finished, he looked at me. "You're filing a financial claim against the property." "I'm establishing documentation of my investment," I said. "What happens next depends on choices made by everyone involved. Mom." His voice was somewhere between disbelief and something approaching respect. "You did this quietly." "I do most things quietly," I said. "You've just never been on this side of it before." He sat down then, without being asked, in the old chair I kept by the window for reading. He sat in it heavily, the way his father used to sit in the chair on Carlisle Street when something had shifted in his understanding of the world. I poured him a cup of coffee without asking and set it on the windowsill beside him. He picked it up and held it with both hands and stared at the steam. "I told myself it was a practical decision," he said finally. "The rental income would help. Elaine's been stressed about the finances since the renovation on the main house went over budget, and I thought—" He stopped. "I thought you'd understand, that you'd want to help." "I have been helping," I said. "For 3 years, I have been helping." He nodded. "I know. You let her tell me this was my home," I said, "and then you let her take it back." He set the mug down. "I should have said something. I should have pushed back on her when she first brought it up." He rubbed his face. "I keep taking the path that seems easiest in the moment, and I don't think far enough ahead." "You never have," I said. "That's always been the thing I couldn't teach you." He looked at me. Something in his face was different, younger, the way men look when they stop managing and start actually feeling. "I don't want to lose you," he said. "I know this is my fault. I know I let it get here. I'm not lost," I said. "But I am telling you that I will not disappear just to make your life less complicated." He was quiet. "The money is documented," I said. "That doesn't go away regardless of what we decide as a family. What matters now is what you decide you are." He stayed for another hour. We didn't resolve anything, not really. But we talked in a way we hadn't talked in years, without the performance of everything being fine, without the comfortable distance of him being the competent adult son and me being the supportive mother who doesn't ask too much. We talked like two people with things to answer for, and that was new. When he left, I stood at the window and watched him walk back to the main house. He paused at the door, hand on the frame, and looked back at the suite. I let him see me watching. 2 days later, Elaine came to my suite alone. She knocked properly this time. I opened the door and waited. She was a composed woman, always had been. Good posture, careful hair, the kind of person who never appeared visibly rattled at social events. But she was rattled now, and composure was not the same thing as calm. She asked if she could come in. I stepped aside. She sat in the chair by the window without being invited, which told me she'd prepared what she was going to say and needed to say it before the details of the room distracted her. I sat across from her and waited. "I owe you an apology," she said. "The way I spoke to you was dismissive. You've been generous to this family in ways I didn't fully consider." "No," I said. She blinked. "You considered them," I said. "You just decided they were less important than what you wanted." A pause. To her credit, she didn't argue. "You're right. I thought because there was no legal obligation, that I had no standing." "Yes." She looked at her hands. "I realize how that sounds." I studied her. She wasn't a bad person, I'd never thought she was a bad person. She was a practical person who had looked at the situation and made a calculation, and the calculation had not included me as a meaningful variable, and that was its own kind of cruelty, even when no cruelty was intended. "I'm not asking you to become someone different," I said. "I'm asking you to stop asking me to become someone smaller." She looked up at me with an expression that was partly relief and partly something more complicated, the expression of a woman who has been told something true she didn't expect to hear in those words. "What do you want?" she asked. "Specifically, I want an amended agreement," I said. "In writing, with both your signatures, that this suite is my residence for as long as I choose it to be. And I want my son's name on it, not just yours." "And the documentation Dorothy filed? That depends on whether the agreement is honored." She nodded slowly. Okay, I said. She left without any further ceremony, and I stood in the silence of my suite and let out a long breath I hadn't known I was holding. Outside the window, the marigolds were catching the late afternoon light, orange and stubborn, just as I'd planted them. The agreement took 3 weeks to formalize. Dorothy's office drafted it, and my son signed it the Tuesday evening after Maisie's spring concert, which felt accidentally right. We stood at the kitchen table, and he signed, and I signed, and Elaine signed, and nobody said anything particularly important. But when I walked back to my suite that night, with my copy in hand, I felt the floor under my feet in a different way. Mine, at least in the ways that mattered. Maisie found out about the custodial account 2 months later when she overheard me talking to Dorothy on the phone and asked about it. I explained it simply, the way you explain things to 8-year-olds who are smart enough to understand more than you think. "It's for your future," I told her. "For college, or whatever you need it for when the time comes." "Why?" she asked, in that direct way of hers. "Because you're the only person in this house who asked me if I was sad," I said. "And that's worth something." She thought about that for a moment, then climbed up next to me on the porch swing and leaned against my arm. We sat there without talking, which was something she and I were good at together, the comfortable kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. That summer, I started doing something I hadn't done in years. I went to the Community Art Center on Thursday evenings, a painting class that met in a room with tall windows and the particular smell of linseed oil and old wood that meant something had been made there for a long time. I wasn't good at it. I told the instructor, a cheerful man named Gil who was somewhere in his 40s and wore the same paint-stained apron every week, that I wasn't there to be good. I was there to be present. He said that was the whole point and handed me a brush. I painted things from memory mostly. The porch on Carlisle Street, Raymond in his garden, the dogwoods along the back fence in April, the ones I'd watched from the rocking chair on the morning everything clarified. The woman on the stool next to mine, a retired schoolteacher named Frances who painted her cats with remarkable detail, looked at one of my paintings one evening and said, "You paint things like you miss them, but you're not sad about missing them." "I'm getting better at that," I said. She nodded like she understood completely. My son changed slowly, the way real changes happen, not with a dramatic announcement or a single conversation that fixes everything, but in the accumulation of small things. He started knocking on my suite door in the evenings sometimes, not for any reason, just to check in. He remembered things I mentioned and followed up on them. He thanked me when I watched Maisie without turning it into a transaction, and he didn't let Elaine's silences speak for him anymore, at least not all of the time. We didn't talk about that morning in April very often. We didn't need to. It sat between us like a fact, known and acknowledged, and that was enough. Elaine and I did not become close. That would be too easy a story, and it wouldn't be true. But we arrived at something workable, a mutual respect built on the understanding that we had both been honest about what we needed and neither of us had blinked first. She started including me in dinner once a week without being asked. She stopped performing and I stopped measuring. And in the space that opened up, something almost like civility grew. It wasn't what I'd imagined when I moved in. It was something more honest. One evening in late August, I sat on the back porch and watched the light go low and golden across the yard. The marigolds had spread a little past where I'd planted them, which marigolds will do if you let them, spilling past their borders into the grass. Maisie was somewhere inside, practicing her multiplication tables out loud, her voice carrying through the screen door. My son's car was in the driveway. The birds at the feeder were competing over the last of the sunflower seed. I thought about the woman who had sat in this same chair in April, hands in her lap, realizing for the first time that trust and paperwork were not the same thing. I had thought then that I was in the process of losing something. I understood now that I had been in the process of finding something, that the finding was just harder to feel than the losing and took longer to name. I was not at the center of their life, and I had stopped needing to be. I had my own life, my painting class, and Dorothy for lunches on Fridays, and the garden, and the weight of Raymond's initials inside the blue notebook. I had Maisie climbing onto the porch swing without knocking and asking me questions that cut straight to the middle of things. I had myself, which turned out to be the beginning of everything. I didn't wait for a grand apology from anyone. I didn't need one. Apologies are for people who still need convincing that the wrong thing happened. I already knew what happened. What I needed wasn't an apology. What I needed was to stop pretending that being overlooked was the price of being loved. Those two things are not the same, and learning to tell the difference was the most valuable thing I had ever done with my life, and I was 67 years old before I did it. If that means anything to you, if you have been sitting in someone else's chair believing that love and invisibility are a package deal, then you already know what I'm not going to say next. You've always known. The question was never whether you deserved better. The question was what you were going to do about it. I'm Marina, and I did something about it.